All right. Letter 78, Miss Clarissa Harlow to Miss Howe, Tuesday evening and continued through the night. Well, my dear, I am alive and here, but how long shall I be either here or alive? Nevertheless, I must tell you that the saucy Betty again fluttered me when she came up with Solmes's message. Although, as you may remember from my last, I was in way before that wanted no additional surprises. Miss, she cried as fast as she could speak, with her arms spread abroad and her fingers distended and held up. Will you be pleased to walk down in your own parlor? There is everybody, I assure you, in full congregation, and there is Mr. Solmes, as fine as a lord, with a chime-in red peruke, fine lace shirt and ruffles, coat trimmed with silver, and with the wrist standing an end with the lace. Quite handsome, believe me. You never saw such an alteration. Ah, miss, shaking her head, 'tis pity you have said so much against him. But you know how to come off all for all that. I hope it will not be too late. Impertinent, said I. Wert thou to bid to come up with this fluttering way? And I took my fan and I fanned myself. Bless me, said she, how soon these fine young ladies will be put into flustrations. I meant not either to offend or frighten you, I am sure. Everybody there, do you say? Who do you call everybody? Why, miss, holding out her left palm open with a flourish and a saucy leer, patting it with the forefinger of every other mentioned person there is, your papa, your mamma, your Uncle Harlow, your Uncle Anthony, your Aunt Irvy, my young lady, and my young master, and Mr. Solmes, with the air of great courtier, standing up because he named you Mrs. Betty, said he. Then the ape of the wench bowed and scraped as awkwardly as I suppose the person she endeavored to intimidate. Pray give my humble service to Miss, and tell her I wait her commands. Was not this a wicked wench? I trembled so I could hardly stand. I was spiteful enough to say that a young mistress, I suppose, bid her put on these airs to frighten me out of capacity of behaving so calmly as should procure me my uncle's compassion. What a way do you put yourself in, miss, said the insolent. Come, dear madam, take up my fan which I have laid up down, and approaching me with it, fan shall I. None of thy impertinence, but say you all my friends are below with him, and I am to appear before them all? I can't tell you if they'll stay when you come. I think they shall seem quite moving when Mr. Solmes shall give me his orders. But what answer shall I carry to the squire? Say I can't go, but yet, when 'tis over, say, I'll wait upon, and I fanned myself all the time, and for I was in a flame, and hemmed and struggled with myself all that I could. And when she returned, drank my water, and finding no hope, presently of a quieter heart, I set her down and followed her with her precipitation. Trembling so that I had not hurried, I questioned if I could have gone down at all. Oh, my dear, what a poor passive machine is the body when the mind is so disordered. There are two doors to my parlor, as I used to call it. As I entered at one, my friends hurried out the other. I saw just the gown of my sister, the last who slid away. My Uncle Anthony went out with them, but he stayed not long, as you shall hear, and they all remained in the next parlor, a wainscot partition only parting the two. I remember both in one, but they were separated in the favor of us girls, for each to receive her visitors at her pleasure. Mr. Solmes approached me as soon as I entered, cringing to the ground, a visible confusion in every feature of his face. After a half a dozen choked up madames, he was very sorry. He was very much concerned. It was his misfortune, and there he stopped, being unable to present a complete sentence. This gave me a little more presence of mind. Cowardice in a foe begets courage in oneself. I see that plainly now. Yet, perhaps, at the bottom, the new made bravo is a greater coward than the other. I turned from him and seated myself in one of the fireside chairs, fanning myself. I have since recollected that I must have looked very saucily. Could I have had any thoughts of the man, I should have despised myself for it. But what can I say in the case of an aversion so perfectly sincere? He hemmed 5 or 6 times, as I had done before, and these produced a sentence that I could not but see his confusion. The sentence produced 2 or 3 more. I believe my aunt was his tutoress, for it was his awe, his reverence for a superlative lady, I assure you. And he hoped 3 times. He hoped before he told me what, that I was too generous. Generosity, he said, was my character, to despise him for such true tokens of his love. I do indeed see you under some confusion, sir, and this gives me hope that although I have been compelled, as I may call it, to this interview, it may be attended with happier effects than I had apprehended from it. He had hemmed himself into more courage. You could not, madame, imagine any creature so blind to your merits and so attracted by them as easily to forego the interest and approbation he was honored with by your worthy family, while he had any hope given him that one day he might, by his perseverance and zeal, expect your favor. I am but too much aware, sir, that it is upon the interest and approbation you mention that you build such hope. It is impossible otherwise that a man who has any regard for his own happiness would persevere against such declarations as I have made, and think myself obliged to make, in justice to you as well as to myself. He had seen many instances, he told me, and had heard of more where ladies had seemed averse and yet had been induced by some motives of compassion, others by persuasion of friends to change their minds, and had been very happily ever afterwards. And he'd hoped that might be the case here. I have no notion, sir, of compliment in an article of such importance as this, yet I am sorry to oblige you to speak my mind so plainly as I do. Know then that I have invincible objections, sir, to your address. I have declared them with an earnest that I believe is without example. And why? Because I believe it is without example that any young creature, circumstanced as I am, was ever treated as I have been treated on your account. It is hope, madame, that you may consent in time he be obtained. That is the hope. I shall be a miserable man if it cannot. Better, sir, give me leave to say you were miserable by yourself than you were to make two so. You may have heard me, or I will convince you that I'm basely prepostered, and once understood you've overheard something that I shall say gave you great offense unguardedly, but hope that what showed my value and I would persist so long as I would have hope. I have indeed heard many things to your disadvantage, and I was far from being pleased with what I'd overheard fall from your lips. But as you were not anything to me and never could be, it was not for me to be concerned about one or the other. I am sorry, madame, to hear this. I am sure you should not tell me of any fault that I would be unwilling to correct in myself. Then, sir, correct this fault. Do not wish to have a poor young creature compelled in the most material article of her life for the sake of motives she despises and in behalf of a person she cannot value, that one in her own right sufficient to set her above all offers, a spirit that craves no more than what it has to make itself easy and happy. I don't see, madame, how you would be happy if I were to discontinue my address for her. This is nothing to you, sir, interrupted I. Do you but withdraw your pretensions as if you thought it fit to start upon another man for my punishment? The blame will not lie at your door. You will be entitled to my thanks, and most heartily will I thank you. He paused and seemed a little at loss. I was going to give him still stronger and more personal insistence of my plain dealing when in came my Uncle Antony. So, niece, so, sitting in a state like a queen, giving audience, haughty audience. Mr. Solmes, why stand you thus humbly? Why this distance, man? I hope to see you upon a most intimate footing before we part. I arose, and I stood as he entered, and approached him with a bent knee. Let me, sir, reverence my uncle, whom I have not for so long a time seen. Let me, sir, beseech your favor and compassion. You'll have the favor of everybody needs when you know how to deserve it. If ever I deserved it, I deserve it now. I have been hardly used. I have been I've been made proposals that ought to have been accepted, that and such as would have been asked of me. Why have I now done thus be banished and confined thus so disgracefully, that I must be allowed to have no free will in an article that concerns my present and future happiness? Miss Clary, replied my uncle, you have had your will in everything till now, and this makes your parents' will sit so heavy on you. My will, sir? Be pleased to allow me to ask, what was my will till now, but my father's will, and yours, my Uncle Harlow's will? Has it not been my pride to obey and oblige? I've never asked a favor that I did not first sit down and consider if it would be fit to be granted. And now, to show my obedience, have I not offered a live single? Have I not offered to live? Have I not offered to live single? Have I not offered to divest myself of my grandfather's bounty and to cast myself onto my papa's, to be withdrawn whenever displeased by him? Why, dear sir, am I made unhappy in a point so concerning to my happiness? Your grandfather's estate is not wished from you. You are not desired to live a single life. You know our motives, and we guess at yours. And let me tell you, well as we love you, we would much sooner choose to follow you to the grave than that yours should take place. I will engage in the solemnest oath that can be offered me. That is the matrimonial one, interrupted him with a big voice, and to his gentleman. It is and shall, cousin Clary, and you, the more you oppose it, the worse it shall be for you. This, and before the man who seemed to assume courage upon it, highly provoked me. Then, sir, you shall soon follow me to the grave indeed. I will undergo the cruelest of deaths. I will even consent to enter into the awful vault of my ancestors and to have that bricked up upon me, then consent to this to be miserable for life. And Mr. Solmes, turning to him, take notice of what I say, this or any death go, and this soon will be over, forever unhappy. My uncle was in a terrible rage upon this. He took Mr. Solmes by the hand, shocked as the man seemed to be, and drew him to the window. Don't be surprised, Mr. Solmes. Don't be concerned at this. We know it rapped out a sad oath. What women will say, the wind is not more boisterous, no more changeable, and again he swore to that. If you think it is still worth your while to wait for such an ungrateful girl as this, I'll engage her, she'll be thereabout. I'll engage her, shall, and third time violently swore to it. Then coming upon me, who had thrown myself, very much disordered by my vehemence, in the contrary window, as if he would have beaten me, his face violently working, his hands clenched, his teeth set. Yes, 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 hissed the poor gentleman. You shall, you shall, you shall. Cousin Clary, be Mr. Solmes. We shall see that you shall, and this 1 week at the farthest, and then the fourth time he'll confirm it. Poor gentleman, how he swore. Strange that people who have suffered in their time by so much storms should be so stormy. I am sorry, sir, said I, to seek your passion. All this I am too but sensible is my owing to my brother's instigation. Who would not himself give instances of duty that is exacted from me? It is best for me to withdraw. I shall but provoke further. I fear, for thou, I would gladly obey you if I could, yet this is a point determined with me, and I cannot much as wish to get it over. How could one help these strong declarations, the man in presence? I was going out at the door I came in at, the gentlemen looking upon one another, as if referring to each other what to do, or whether to engage my stay, or suffer me to go ahead. Who should I meet at the door but my brother, who had heard all that was passing? Judge my surprise when he bolted upon me so unexpectedly, and taking my hand, which he grasped in violence, "Return, pretty miss," said he. "Return, if you please. You shall not yet be bricked up. Your instigating brother shall save you from that. Oh, thou fallen angel," said he, peering upon my downcast face, "such a sweetness here, and such an obstinacy there," tapping my neck. "Oh, thou true woman, thou so young, but you shall not have your rake. Remember that," in a loud whisper, as if would be decently indecent before this man. "You shall be redeemed, and this worthy gentleman," raising his voice, "will be so good as to redeem you from ruin. And hereinafter you will bless him, or have reason to bless him, for his condescension." That was the brutal brother's word. He had led me to meet Mr. Solmes, whose hand he took, as if himself held mine. "Here, sir," said he, "take the rebel daughter's hand. I give it to you now. She shall confirm the gift within a week's time, and will either have neither father, mother, nor uncles to boast of." I snatched my hand away. "How now, miss? How now, sir? What right have you to dispose of my hand? If you have governed everybody else, you shall not govern me, especially in a point so immediately relative to myself, in which you have neither nor ever shall have anything to do." I would have broke from him, but he held my hand so fast. "Let me go, sir. Why am I being thus treated? Your design, I had no doubt, with you unmanly grips, to hurt me as you do, but again I say, whereas it is, I am not you." He tossed my hand from him with a whirl that pained my very shoulder. I wept and held my other hand to depart. Mr. Solmes blamed him. So did my uncle. He had no patience, he said, with such perseverance, and to think of my reflections upon himself before he entered. He had only given me back the hand I had not deserved he should touch. It was one of my arts to pretend to be pained. Mr. Solmes said he would sooner give up all of his hopes of me than that I should be used so unkindly, and he offered to plead in my behalf to both of them, and applied himself with a bow as if interposition. But I said, "I'm obliged to your intention, Mr. Solmes, to interpose to save my brother's violence, but I cannot wish to owe so poor an obligation to a man who has ungenerously persevered is the occasion, at least the pretense of that violence, and of all my disgraceful sufferings." "How generous in you, Mr. Solmes," said my brother to him, "to interpose in behalf of such an unmovable spirit. But I beg of you to persist, for all of our family's sake, and for her sake too. If you love her, persist. Let us save her, if possible, from ruining herself. Look at this person. Think of her fine qualities. All the world confess them, and we glorified in her till now. She is worth saving, and after 2 or 3 more struggles, she will be yours, and take my word for it, will reward your patience. Talk not, therefore, of giving up your hopes for a little whiny folly. She has entered upon a parade in which she knows not how to quit with female grace. She has only her pride and obstinacy to encounter, and depend on it, you will be happy a man in a fortnight as a married man can be. You've heard me say, my dear, that my brother has always taken a liberty to reflect upon our sex and upon our matrimony. He would not if he did not think it wit. Just as poor Mr. Wiley and others we both know profane and ridicule Scripture and all evidence to their pretensions, the same pernicious talent, and to have thought that they are too wise to be good. Mr. Solmes, with a self-satisfied air, presumptuously said he would suffer everything to oblige my family and to save me, and doubted not to be amply rewarded, could he be so happy to succeed at last. Mr. Solomon, said I, if you have any regard for your own happiness, mine is out of the question. You have not generosity enough to make that any part of your scheme. Prosecute no further your address. It is but just to tell you that I could not bring my heart to think of you without the utmost disapprobation before I was used to have been. And can you think I am such a slave, such a poor slave, as to be brought to change my mind by a violent usage I have met with? And you, sir, turning to my brother, if you think that meekness always indicates tameness, there is no magnanimity without bluster. Own yourself mistaken for once, for you have reason to judge from henceforth that a generous mind is not to be forced, and that he lifted his hands and his eyes. No more, said the imperious wretch. I charge you. Then turning to my uncle, do you hear, sir? This was once the faultless niece. This is your favorite? Mr. Solmes looked as if he knew not what to think of the matter. And had I been left alone with him, I saw plainly I could got rid of him easily enough. My uncle came up to me, looking up to my face, down at my feet. And is it possible this can be you? All this violence from you, Miss Clary? Yes, it's possible, sir. And I presume to say this vehemence on my side is but the natural consequence of the usage I have met and the rudeness I am treated with, even with your own presence, by a brother who has no more right to control me than I have to control him. This usage, Cousin Clary, was not till all other means were tried on you. Tried? To what end, sir? Do I contend for anything more than a mere negative? You may, sir, turning to Mr. Solomon, possibly you may be induced, but the rather to persevere thus ungenerously as the usage I have met with for your sake, and what you have now seen offered by my brother will show you what I can bear were my evil destiny ever to make me yours. Lord, madam, cried Solmes, all this distorted in 20 different attitudes as my brother and my uncle were blessing themselves and speaking only to each other by their eyes and by their working features. Lord, madame, what construction is this? A fair construction, sir, interrupted I myself. And that you do approve of this is evident that your declared perseverance, when you know I am confined, banished, and insulted in order to make me consent to be what I can never be. And this, let me tell you, as I often told others, not the motives of obstinacy, but aversion. Excuse me, sir, turning to my uncle. To you, as my papa's brother, I owe duty. I beg your pardon that I cannot obey you, but as my brother, he's but a brother. He shall not constrain me. And turning to my brother, knit your brows, sir, and frown if you will. I will ask you, would you, in my case, make the sacrifices I'm willing to obtain for everyone's favor? If not, what right have you to treat me thus, and to procure me to be treated as I have been treated for so long past? I put myself by this time into a greater disorder. They were silent, and seemed to want to talk to one another by their looks, walking about in violent disorders too, but whilst I sat down, fanning myself as it happened against the glass, I could perceive my color go and come, and being sick to the very heart, in apprehension of the fainting, I rung. Betty came in. I called for a glass of water and drank it. But nobody minded me. I heard my brother pronounce the words art, art, art to Solmes, which I suppose kept him back, together with the apprehension that he would not be welcomed. Else I could see the man was more affected than my brother, and, still fearing I should faint, rising, took hold of Betty's arm, staggering with extreme disorder, yet curtsying to my uncle. Let me hold you by you, Betty, said I. Let me withdraw. Whither go you, niece, said my uncle. We have not done yet with you. I charge you to depart not. Mr. Solmes has something to open to you that will astonish you, and you shall hear it. Only, sir, by your leave for a few minutes into the air, I will return if you command it. I will hear all that I'm to hear, but that it may be over for now and forever. Will you go with me, Betty? And so, without further prohibition, I retired to the garden, and there, casting myself upon first seat and throwing Betty's apron over my face, leaning against her side, my hand between hers, I gave to a violent burst of grief and of passion of both, which, as it seemed, saved my heart from breaking, for I was sensible of an immediate relief. I have already given you specimens of Miss Betty's impertinence. I shall not therefore trouble you with more, for the wench, notwithstanding my distress, took great liberties with me after she saw me a little recovered, and as I walked further into the garden, insomuch I was so obliged to silence her by an absolute prohibition of saying another word to me, and then she dropped behind me quite sullen and gloomy. It was near an hour before I was sent for again. The messenger was my cousin Dolly Hervey, who has an eye of compassion and respect. For Miss Hervey always loved me and calls herself my scholar, as you know. And toward my company was desired. Betty left us. Who commands my attendance? Said I. Have you not been in tears, my dear? Who can forbear tears? Said she. Why, what's the matter, Cousin Dolly? Sure, nobody is entitled to weep in this family but I. Yes, I am, madame, said she, because I love you. I kissed her, and it is for me, my sweet cousin, that you shed tears. There was never a love lost between us, but tell me, what designs to be done with me, that I have this kind of instance of your compassion for me? You must take no notice of what I tell you, but my mamma has been weeping for you, too, with me, but the durst not let anybody see it. Oh, my Dolly, said my mamma, there was never so set a malice in a man as in your cousin James Harlowe. They will ruin the flower and ornament of their family. As how, Miss Dolly? Did she not explain herself? As how, my dear? Yes, she said, Mr. Solmes would have given up his claim for you, for he said you hated him and that there were enough Mr. Lovelace and to live single. My mamma was for it too, for they heard all that passed between you and my uncle Anthony and my cousin James, saying it was impossible to think of prevailing upon you to have Mr. Solmes. My Uncle Harlowe seemed to be in the same way of thinking, at least. My mamma says he did not say anything to the contrary, but your papa was immovable, and was angry at your mamma and mine upon it, and upon hearing your brother and sister and Uncle Anthony joined in, and changed the scene entirely. In short, she says that Mr. Solmes has great matters engaged to him. He owned that you were a finest young lady in England, and he would be content to be but a little beloved, if you could not, after marriage, engage your heart for the sake of honor to call you his, but for 1/12 month. I suppose he would break your heart at the next, for he is a cruel-hearted man, I'm sure. My friends may break my heart, Cousin Dolly, but Mr. Solmes will never have it in his power. I don't know this, miss. You'll have good luck to avoid having him, but what can I find? For my mamma says they're all now of one mind, herself excepted, and she is forced to be silent. Your papa and brother are being so outrageous. I am got about minding my brother, Cousin Dolly, but he is but my brother. But to my papa I owe duty and obedience if I could comply. We are apt to be fond of anybody who will side with us when we are oppressed or provoked. I always loved my cousin Dolly, for now she endeared herself to me 10 times more by soothing concern for me, as I asked what she would do were she in my case. Without hesitation, she replied, have Mr. Lovelace out of hand and take up her own estate if she were me, and that would be the end of it. And Mr. Lovelace, she said, was a fine gentleman. Mr. Solmes was not worthy to buckle his shoes. Miss Hervey told me further that her mamma was desired to come to me to fetch me in, but she excused herself. So I should have all my friends, she said, believed, sit in judgment upon me. I wish it had been so. But as I have been told, neither my papa nor my mamma would trust themselves with me. The one passion forsake, it seems, for my mamma for tenderness consideration. By the time we entered the house, Miss accompanied me into the parlor and left me as a person devoted. Then I just then thought. Nobody was there. I sat down and had the leisure to weep, reflecting with a sad heart upon what my cousin Dolly had told me. They were all they were all in my sister's parlor now, for having heard confusion and mixture of voices, some louder than others, drowning, as it seemed, the more compassionate accents. The female accents I could distinguish the drowned ones be, oh dear, what half-hearted sex is the other? Children of the same sex, how could they have such cruelty when they give it by travel? Do they set the conversation with one another? But this may submit exception, neither, for she has been thought of masculine in her air and in her spirit. She is then, perhaps, a soul of other sex. Soul of other sex in a body of ours. And so often for the honor of our own, will I judge every woman of the future who, imitating the rougher manners of men, acts beseemingly the gentleness of her own sex? Forgive me, my dear. Forgive me, my dear friend, breaking into my story by these reflections, were I rapidly to pursue my narration without thinking, without reflecting as it. But while I think as I write, I cool, my hairy spirits is elate. I believe I was one, I believe I was above a quarter of an hour. I was alone a quarter of an hour, enjoying my own configurations, contemplations. For anyone I believe I should hardly be able to keep up in my right mind, since vehemence and passion would always be the utmost. But while I think as I write, I coolly and my here and hurry my spirits is alloyed. I believe I was above quarter of an hour, acting on my own comfortless contemplation before anyone came to see me. They seemed fit in full debate. My aunt looked in first. Oh, my dear, said she, are you there? And withdrew hastily, apprised them of it. And then, as agreed upon, I suppose, in came Uncle Antony, crediting Mr. Solmes with the words, let me lead you in, my dear friend, having hold his hand, while the new made beau awkwardly followed, but more edgingly, as I may say, setting his feet mincely to avoid treading upon his leader's heel. Excuse me, my dear, this seems levity, but for those who do not love, everything is ungraceful for us. I stood up. My uncle looked very surly. Sit down, girl. And drawing a chair for me, he neared his dear friend. He neared his dear friend